our lead data scientist here, Mike Leone, analyzed every team in last year's Best Ball Mania 4 final. And in today's show, we are going to share our top 5 learnings with you. At the end of this show, we're going to put all this advice into play and draft a Best Ball Mania 5 team while talking through our thought process. All right, Leone, let's get started here with topic number 1, and that is quarterback stacking. I think most people listening to this understand that we should be stacking. How many quarterbacks to stack, though, how many quarterbacks we should have, etc., I think is still somewhat gray. Leone, what are your big takeaways that you learned about quarterback stacking in Best Ball Mania?
Yeah, I mean, it reaffirmed mostly like what we know, which is if you stack your quarterbacks with a pass catcher, you're more likely to advance in the regular season. You're more likely to make it to the playoffs. You're more likely to then make it to the finals. And then you have a higher expected value once you make those week 17 finals. I think something looking at the manifesto I did last year was trying to work in some more 3 QB teams that were able to stack all 3 QBs. And the data kind of bared that out, as that was like sort of the best positive leverage that you could have. Teams that were able to draft 3 QBs and get at least one pass catcher with all 3 of those quarterbacks, they advanced at a higher rate than average. They made it to the finals at a higher rate than the average playoff team, and they had the best expected value of any subset when looking at number of stacked quarterbacks. 2 was totally fine, but like half the field had two stacked quarterbacks in the week 17 finals. Only about 16% of the field were able to stack all 3. So that just gives you, 3 cracks at a game just going off and taking advantage of that correlation. But it also, in the kind of unique structure of the Best Ball Mania tournaments, just gives you more outs to differentiate from your opponents as well.
Yeah, Herzig, I don't go out of my way, or I haven't been going out of my way on Underdog, where you have fewer roster spots, 18 roster spots, to get 3 quarterbacks. However, from looking at this, I'm more inclined to do so. 3 out of 18 does strike me as a lot, especially if we have an elite quarterback on our roster. So how have you been playing the 3 quarterback stuff? And are you going to do more 3 quarterback on Underdog now that you know this?
Yeah, and I mean, stacking is obviously very important, but we also want to make sure that we're not, giving up and completely reaching to make sure you get that third stack partner. So in that, that small percent that Leone mentioned, like we still want to make sure we are drafting sharply, with everything else. And so that's where like I'm not going to say like, okay, because of this, I'm no longer taking an elite QB, or when I do take an elite QB, yeah, I'm going to go draft 2 more QBs. It's more of as the structure comes to me, and it's I missed out on the early QBs. That's okay. I know I can still make a 3 QB build work. I can still make it plus EV. I just now need to make sure, like, let me see where I can get these kind of stack partners, and doing it without reaching, doing it without drafting your 9th, your 10th wide receiver, or over accounting for, draft capital in certain pockets of the draft.
A couple questions here, Leone. When you say stacked, how many are you looking to stack with? Is a single stack enough to consider it a stack? Do you want to have 2, 3, 4? How many pass catchers should we have with our quarterback stacks?
Yeah, so I looked at just number of quarterbacks stacked, which was the minimum threshold, which was like at least 1 pass catcher. In the manifesto that I did last season, I'm going to redo this season, I break it down a little bit more further into like number of stack partners. And, ideally, I think you'd have somewhere around 4 to 6 of your skill players, of your pass catchers stacked with one of your quarterbacks. Now, kind of like Herzig said, you have to think through this stuff critically. If you draft a pure pocket passer like Kirk Cousins, I really want to try and get a double stack in there, right? Like, to get through the playoff weeks, if Kirk is the guy you need, he's going to carry a pass catcher with him, and I want to have multiple outs there. If I take someone like Jaden Daniels, I'd like to stack him. I'm fine double stacking him, but if I end up with a single stack there, I'm not going to, take Ben Sinnott 2 rounds ahead of ADP just to force that double stack, because I know part of the edge in drafting Jaden Daniels is the rushing upside, and thus the correlation between him and his pass catchers is going to be less than between Kirk Cousins and his pass catchers.
How do you think about running backs as part of a stack? Because sometimes I get into this spot, and it's happened to me this year with Josh Allen a bunch, where I miss out on Kincaid and I have Josh Allen, and I don't even love the value on Shakir or Coleman or some of these other guys. And I'm like, well, let me just stack Josh Allen with James Cook, and then I come back later with something like Dawson Knox or something dusty at the end. I don't even know if that qualifies as a stack, but yeah, how do you think about running backs as part of the stack?
Yeah, so I didn't include running backs as like a team stack, but I do think the correlation there is still positive, especially like during the regular season where like if the whole offense does really well, the running back's going to come along with it. It's a little dicier in the playoffs. You have to think through it a bit more where that single week upside you're trying to hit, sometimes they might cannibalize each other. With Josh Allen and James Cook. Like James Cook is a good receiving back. I think that's completely fine. I would I would be more likely to try that if I had Josh Allen than if I didn't. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be saying I have to have James Cook, but it would make me more likely to draft him if I already have Josh Allen as like the quick answer. But there's also, going back to the three quarterback thing too. If you have three stack quarterbacks, there's builds and paths where like, Danny Dimes was great one week and then Saquon Barkley was great another playoff week. And it's easier to get away with yo-yoing that on a team if you've got two other quarterbacks that are stacked and they can help you get through the week that it's Barkley and not Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I think clearly Herzig on DraftKings, we want three quarterbacks a ton. I know Leone didn't look at that, but I try to get three quarterbacks and three stacked quarterbacks a ton on DraftKings. Any more notes for you, Herzig, on quarterback stacking here?
Yeah, and for that running back format, I think we first accept that if you're betting on an offense, the running back and the QB are going to positively correlate across the season. So it will help your advance rate to get that running back on there. Where you often see the kind of negative correlation is specifically think of the format like Lamar and Derrick Henry. Those are two guys that across the season, Ravens could score, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 plus touchdowns. And like in those scenarios, those guys both hammer. But in week 17, where you're competing against 500 other teams, most likely they cannibalize each other. So those are probably two guys that in a large field, hey, best ball mania, I'm probably not putting on the same team. But if we're talking smaller field contests where it's only a 20-person final, now it's far more important. Can you advance out of your pod? Can you get there? And you can still have a pretty decent game out of those two. And the cannibalization doesn't hurt you nearly as much when you don't need the nuts. You only need to beat out 20 or so people. So this is kind of a good example of think through the format of where you're playing, think through that specific contest, and think through the kind of roster construction for those running backs, because a pass catcher, you may get that positive correlation. If it's a rushing QB and a guy who doesn't catch, like that's as bad as it can get.
Yeah. By the way, if you're looking for backdoor stacks for a third quarterback, we did episode 726. You can go back to, we talked about backdoor stacks. One that I've been doing that I don't think we mentioned on there, one I've been doing lately is Aaron Rodgers, Corley, Braylon Allen, Conklin. Like, and if you're in an emergency, you get stuck. And that is a real cheap one. And I kind of like all those guys a little bit, at least right now. There's a lot of FUD out there on Aaron Rodgers for missing the mandatory whatever. My take is that's all noise and it's going to be fine. Okay. Let's go to topic number 2. Controversial topic in these streets, week 17 correlation. Leone, a lot of this was borne out in the sims that we ran last year for Best Ball Mania. What do you want to tell the people about week 17 correlation?
Yeah, when you're in a final, that's like 500 or so people. Like Best Ball Mania was 441 last year. I think it's a little over 500 this year. You do just start to see where you need like these really high end, outlier type game outcomes where everybody gets carried. And in order to benefit from that, you want to be bringing back opponents, on the opposite side of your quarterback team stack. And we saw this in the data. The teams that had 2 or 3 quarterbacks with a full game stack, their expected value in the finals was much higher than the teams that only had one or didn't have any full game stacks. And a game stack is just defined as a quarterback with at least one same team pass catcher and at least one opponent skill player. That's how we looked at it. The other thing that was interesting is these teams that went out of their way to game stack week 17 didn't have issues making it to the finals. In fact, like a lot of these drafters were sharper and were more likely to make it to the finals than those that didn't. So I do think that just shows it's not that hard to like layer in that week 17 correlation without, you can do that without sacrificing your ability to advance out of the regular season. And in a lot of cases, it makes it easier to just like diversify your player pool. If you're drafting, a lot of teams, you can break ties. You're looking for a second or third tight end late. You've got the Jaguar stack that we love. You take Chigakonkwo, in another build, maybe that's a different tight end that you're correlating. Maybe you've got a Caleb Williams stack, and instead of taking a Conquo, you've got Noah Fant. And that's a good way to diversify between two, late round tight ends that probably rank very similarly.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to think about it. By the way, if you guys, I guess my question, Leone, is does it matter which week 17 game is stacked, or is it just you need week 17 or you want week 17 correlation? We do have rankings on the site tiered off for week 17 games. And just for people reference, our tier 1 of week 17 games are Cardinals at Rams, Ravens at Texans, Packers at Vikings, Raiders at Saints. I know Herzig has already memorized all of these games and matchups with his flashcards. But yeah, Leone, does it matter which game, or are we just looking for any kind of week 17 correlation?
So we do have the playoff strength of schedule factored into our rankings a little bit, what the team totals are for those weeks. But I'm not going to go out of my way to start reaching on players just because they're in a really good environment week 17. Maybe I use that as a tiebreaker, but essentially I just want to draft a really smart team overall, get good value, and then make the correlations work. We saw last year with the Cleveland Jets game, everyone was kind of afraid to stack that game because it's two good defenses, cold weather. That game gets a little weird. It gets a little nutty. And then all of a sudden you've got Jerome Ford, David Njoku, Breece Hall. You've got these players that have been carried by this game environment you didn't expect. And, we had it a few years ago with a couple late round picks, Rashad Penny versus Amon-Ra St. Brown in a Seattle-Detroit game that went nuts and really helped dictate who won Best Ball Mania 2. So I do think that it's okay to correlate games that you might not be thrilled about on paper before the season starts.
And I think, Herzig, it's important that we emphasize field size here because we're talking about Best Ball Mania. We're talking about a roughly 500 person final. That is far different than a lot of the other finals that you will see out there, where I think if we ran sims on those very small field finals, it would not be as advantageous. The other thing I wanted to mention, Herzig, that Leone pointed out on Twitter, the people that are doing this, the people that are doing week 17 correlation are likely the most thoughtful best ball drafters. They're trying hard. They're not sitting on the toilet, drafting 8 teams at a time. They are grinding, and therefore they're more likely to make the finals anyways. But yeah, Herzig, go ahead on any updated week 17 correlation thoughts.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add there as well is, there's two things here. First off, when you have your quarterback, I want to make it clear, it is still always more valuable to stack with your quarterback than worry about that week 17 bring back, because the correlation with your quarterback, that lasts all through the regular season and in each of the playoff weeks. And even in week 17, if you're making a 1-week DFS lineup and you draft your QB and you have a choice between a bring back or your stack partner, you're still going to go with your stack partner. There's still more correlation with your actual QB. The bringbacks do matter, but it is far less. So when you're choosing between those two, always go for the stack partner first. The second is we talk about stacks with the QB aspect, but what's kind of often overlooked is the mini stack component. Mini stacks can be just 2 players that are playing against each other, usually 2 wide receivers, but it can also be wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and you can still get correlation in those scenarios. And that's what we talked about in the Thursday night, week 17 game last year. David Njoku and Breece Hall. Both those guys went off. You really didn't need the quarterbacks in either of those games. And to be honest, how excited were you about those quarterbacks coming into the season? Probably not that much. So you don't need to force your stack to grab that third QB. If it works, it works. And if you're excited about it, that's awesome. But mini stacks also have substantial value.
Yes, for sure. Okay. Let's get to one that probably hasn't been talked about enough. And I think this is important. Live players. How many players, when you get to the finals, do you need to have a chance? Now, obviously, having a full team is best. I'm not sure people understand how drastic that is. And some people are like, well, how can we predict that? How can we create our team so that we're more likely to have live players in week 17? That's hard, but I do think there's some things we can do. So yeah, Leone, what did the data say as we get to point number 3 here about live players? And by the way, we're just defining live players as guys who are active on the field playing in week 17.
Yeah, guys who scored more than 0 points on a given week. It's not 100% the best way to look at this, but it's one of the cleanest ways to look at it. And the data is, pretty crazy. If you look at the Best Ball Mania finalists, there were 441 last year. There were about 10 teams that only had 9 or 10 live players. They had about 0.5% chance of finishing in the top 10. There were 31 teams that had almost a full roster, 17 or 18 live players, and their odds of finishing in the top 10 was more like 5%. So we're talking like 10 times the odds of those 9 to 10 players. And there's sort of three things this is capturing. One, obviously you've got a full healthy squad and you've just got more outs in terms of like, if players are on the field contributing, they can run into a good game. Even late round players, that's helpful. Two, if you're fully healthy, that means your players that you drafted early didn't get healthy. In some ways, that's pure luck, but that's capturing this. Three, though, your ability to differentiate once you get into these finals is pretty big. If you've only got 9 or 10 players, you might be, nearly covered in terms of your contributing players by another roster that has 4 or 5 extra live players, and they've got more outs to get around you, and they can completely box you out. So it was really, really important. It's hard to understate that. I think that is, as much as we want to optimize for the playoffs week 17, there's a little bit of, if you just get as many teams through as possible, you increase your odds of just running into one of these teams that has, fully healthy contributing squad.
Yeah, and I was tracking that last year. I tweeted, going into the playoffs or after round one, my teams left and how many guys were live. That was really all that I cared about. I was like, God, find me a team that has all my guys live. Now, Herzig, I know what people are thinking. They're thinking, how can we draft teams that are more likely to have live players come week 17? I think the obvious way is to draft as close to the regular season as possible. We just got hit with a Juwan Johnson foot surgery today. Sounds like he'll be back for early in the season, but it's obviously a hit. And so the earlier you draft, the more you run into situations like that. How do you try to think about getting teams healthy into week 17?
Yeah, so obviously injuries is the biggest thing, and trying to predict injuries is very difficult. But what we can kind of predict is like, what is the willingness of, if there is an injury, for that person to kind of fight and get back on the field? And so I put out some analysis earlier in this year to kind of think through like, hey, whether it's contract issues, whether it's age, whether it's the team being in contention. But often we see someone kind of those older veterans that are on teams that are just really struggling. They're not in the playoff. They're more likely to just kind of take that rest. And if they have a slight injury, they're not fighting to get back. So I do think there are kind of, as you think through, like this isn't, I wouldn't call this like a true science, but think through like, hey, what impacts are going to, give us the greatest chance of having these players wanting to be there, being competitive and on the field. The other I would say is when we get to that last round, we get to the 18th, there's a popular, hey, let's scroll down and see if you can find the players that aren't being drafted. There's definitely validity and strength in that, but we also got to be careful, because if we're doing this in the 16th, 17th, 18th round and drafting guys that aren't actually going to be seeing the field come playoff time, like that also hurts your lineup a lot. So there's kind of that balance that we want to find later in drafts for, yes, it's value to get guys that aren't being drafted, but we don't want to go so far that, hey, these guys aren't even going to be on the field come, playoff time.
Yeah, and we are trying to factor in some of these risks. Like Daniel Jones, I think, is probably a better play than we have it probably right now. However, there is a big chance that if the Giants are not in contention, that he is benched down the stretch in favor of Drew Lock, because Daniel Jones has roughly $25 million in injury guarantees on 2025. And so if they want to cut him, they need to make sure he's healthy. We've seen that play out with Russell Wilson, Derek Carr. In other spots, Geno Smith, I think, is probably one that is at some risk of being benched down the stretch. But the way I really try to play it is right now I'm doing mostly low stakes drafts, mostly lotto style stuff. I'm mostly trying to save my high stakes for as close to season as possible. So I understand the depth charts best. All the injuries are behind us. All the preseason injuries are behind us best, hopefully. And so, yeah, those last, 3-4 weeks before week one, I'm just trying to jam as many high stakes in as I can just to try to get a healthy team through to week 17.
Yeah, and the data in the Best Ball Manifesto that I did last year kind of bore that out, where based on the time of year that you drafted, you could see like once you get into late July, early August, you start to see the increase of live players go up. And that was sort of like a good combination of like, you can still get some really good closing line ADP value, but you're not taking as much risk. Now I'm drafting now because it's fun and I won't draft all my teams if I don't draft now. But yeah, if you had to pick a time to draft, it's probably like early August is about the best time.
Yeah.
And I was going to throw out there as well, when you think of specific contests, like this contest, like the marathon on Underdog or drafters, where, hey, this is the full season of points, drafting later on in the summer, where we know we've seen that teams that are drafted in August score more points than the ones that are drafted in May and June. And in traditional terms like Best Ball Mania, it's not as big of a deal because you're only competing regular season against the people in your pod. But when you're competing against every other team that's being drafted, substantial edge to waiting and drafting in August.
All right. Let's go to topic number 4, and that is average draft position value. I think there's 2 ways to think about this, Leone. First, average draft position value in terms of the current draft you're in. In other words, you see the ADP there in the app, and you see where you're picking. Ideally, we'd be picking guys that are after their ADP, after their average draft position. The one that I actually care more about, though, and I don't know if I should or not, but the one I care more about is closing line value. In other words, the ADP of a guy right before week 1. So if I take a guy in round 9 now, and then in September, he's going in round 5, I consider that a massive, massive win for me. Shout out to me. So those are the 2 kinds of ADP value we're talking about here, Leone. Which one is more valuable? Any more thoughts on ADP value?
So closing line is definitely more valuable. It's less controllable, but it's more valuable. And that's, a combination of things. Like, one, you got lucky. You took Blake Corum, and Kyron Williams tears his ACL in the beginning of August. Now Blake Corum's, a 4th, 5th round pick, and you've been taking him in round 13. That's massive closing line value. And what we saw is, if I broke it down into like 10 different buckets by each 10th percentile, the teams with the top 10% most closing line ADP value, they made the finals at double the rate of expected. So 20% of the finalists were in that first bucket when it should have only been 10%. So it clearly matters. I was surprised to see it also matters once you get there. I would have thought like all the value of getting ADP value would have been washed out if you have a team that's good enough to make week 17. It didn't matter like a ton, like in terms of like bucket 1 versus bucket 4, but those teams in the bottom 3 buckets, the bottom 30th percentile in ADP value, still saw like pretty significant minus expected value, whether it was closing line ADP value or the value you see in your draft room. The value you see in your draft room, obviously way more controllable. You see the number, you don't have to think about where it's going to go. It's also one way to get better closing line value is to get better value at the time that you're drafting. That can only help. And this doesn't matter as much, but we do still see those top 6 buckets of ADP value in your draft room at the time you're drafting. Those teams were more likely to make it to the finals than that 10% randomness. And the bottom 4 buckets were all less likely to make it to the finals. Not nearly as pronounced, but it still clearly did matter.
Some of this I feel like is self-fulfilling, Herzig. I tweeted about Marshawn Lloyd, and now Marshawn Lloyd's ADP is going up, right? I created it for myself. Our rankings, and then when I do the Market Monday, I can start to see it really clearly now. Our rankings are having a big impact on ADP. So some of it is self-fulfilling there, but it's still in the data is so valuable. It seems. How much are you thinking about ADP value, Herzig, when you're doing drafts?
Yeah, not everyone has the ability to put out a tweet and move the market. I mean, I tweet about Theo Johnson and everyone just kind of even ignores him even more. But no, I think at the end of the day, like ADP is very important. And, Leone and I earlier this week, when we were doing our live stream, shout out Tuesdays, 4 p.m. on the ETR site. You actually used an interesting word. You said like, you're like, there's a level of humility where even though our ranks may have a player a couple picks higher than someone else, the other player was, I think, like an ADP value of almost around. And so even though we didn't like that player, we don't end up with that player as often. We choose that player because the ADP overall, there's a strong kind of, there's just a strong value from the market. And this allows us to get exposure to players that we're not otherwise getting. So it gives you a more balanced portfolio, and you're doing it when you're getting value compared to what the rest of the market is drafting that player. So end of the day, ADP is not the end all be all. You're allowed to kind of tether yourself away from it, but it's a great way to kind of mix in exposure, mix in non-traditional stacks that you're not normally ending up with. And overall, kind of it just makes you a sharper player.
Yeah. I mean, earlier in the draft process, like, last month or when things first started getting going, I'm more likely to ignore ADP. Now I have more respect for the market. By the time August gets here, I'll have even more respect for where the market is at. So I'm kind of on a sliding scale of how much respect I have for ADP. As the market gets more liquid, certainly they'll be sharper.
You also get into situations where, maybe you like wide receiver X more than wide receiver Y, but you're drafting 2 wide receivers, the next 2 rounds, and you take the one with the better ADP because that just increases your odds of getting both of those guys, of the guy that you like better but has a worse ADP falling to you. And then you start running into situations where if you're willing to wait and take his ADP value, you get like the best versions of these teams because you've just got them at better prices with better players connected to them than the other drafters that are taking these players or maybe just reaching on them because they really like the player. I'm still going to have players I take before ADP, and players that I have 30% of in Best Ball Mania. I'm just going to be pretty thoughtful about which players that is. And again, like the humility thing, like I'm okay having like 2 to 3% of a guy at like really good prices who I don't like. I don't have to go stone 0%.
Yeah, for sure. Somebody sent me a question, which was a rare one today, but it was related to this. He had a Purdy team going, and somehow Kincaid was still on the board. This was like Kincaid was like 20, 30 spots past ADP. He was on the clock deciding between Kittle, he had Purdy, or Kincaid. I said there's just absolutely no way I'm passing on Dalton Kincaid 20 spots past ADP, even if I already have Purdy. And so would you agree with that, Leone, that the ADP value of something that extreme is going to be more valuable than the stacking of getting Purdy and Kittle?
Yeah, I would have gone Kincaid there. The kind of break even I looked at was about like 1.5 rounds of ADP value, but that's like assuming the middle of the draft. Early in the draft, the draft capital, each pick's worth so much that 20 picks early is like a ton of ADP value that you would be passing on to not take. And if you look at the difference between Kincaid and Kittle's ADP, it might even be like 2 full rounds. So at a premium part in the draft, I would have, and just the only reason I might have gone Kittle is, let's say, like he didn't have Debo or Ayuk already, and you don't want to roll out a naked Purdy. But assuming he had at least one of the San Francisco wide receivers, I would have gone Kincaid.
Yeah, he did. Okay. Let's get to the fifth and final topic we're going to talk about here today, which is where to spend draft capital. We can go position by position here. We'll start with quarterback. Leone, there's been plenty of debate about elite quarterback versus late round quarterback. Let's start with quarterback here, where to spend draft capital.
Yeah, and this is where, with all of this data, it's important to understand that like it's descriptive. This is what happened last year, and we're drawing conclusions from that. And I think a lot of the stuff we've looked at so far is stuff that's likely to persist year over year. When we start getting into the positional stuff, we have to think through the landscape of the ADPs for the upcoming year and also what happened last year a bit more. Last year, people were drafting elite quarterbacks earlier because they had smashed the prior season, and it didn't really work out for them. And late round QB did really well. So all the data is going to say like, hey, if you took 3 QBs and you didn't invest a lot in quarterbacks, like you did really well. So that's just something to keep in mind. I will note that despite it being a bad year for the elite quarterbacks, once you made the finals, the teams that invested in, again, if we broke down draft capital for quarterbacks into like 5 buckets, like every 20%, the teams in the top 40% of investment in quarterback simulated the best in the actual week 17 finals.
Yeah. And I think Herzig on Underdog quarterback is way more important. I'm way more likely to spend draft capital on elite quarterback on Underdog than I am anywhere else. One other thing about the data, Herzig, I believe it was Lamar Jackson just going nuts in the fantasy playoffs last year. If I remember correctly, there was that Dolphins game. But anyways, Herzig, thoughts on quarterback data Leone has?
Yeah, I mean, the descriptive thing is very important. And if you look at the last 2 years, we get the complete opposite conclusions just because of the small sample size of how those elite QBs did. And so I think going forward, you need to personally assess, like, how do you think that the elite QBs will do this year? Because we know from a structural wise, it is more important on Underdog. It scores a higher percentage of the points. It's fewer roster spots. That if you can get an elite QB that does really well, and the late QBs don't do really well, it's going to absolutely smash. And obviously the inverse when the opposite happens. So for this year, when I'm specifically thinking, like, I think that there are some decent values because of the, it's swaying back with, elite QBs kind of becoming more valuable. And when I am grabbing those elite QBs, it's also really easy to stack with their elite counterparts. With Lamar, it's Mark Andrews or Zay Flowers. With Jalen Hurts, you can even get A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And so when I am investing in those elite QB, I do like to invest in an elite pass catcher as well to go with him. And so I think that's a very viable, strong strategy this year, even though last year it didn't work out as well. But we understand why it didn't. And then from a late round QB, that's where it's not that you can't do it, but if you are going late round QB, you need to make sure that you are really taking advantage of the early rounds in that draft. Because if we're not spending on one of the elites, make sure you have those great wide receivers. Take advantage of an elite tight end. Don't just kind of mix and match and say, yeah, I'm going to go with a lot of running backs early on, and I'm going to kind of throw in some QBs here and there. Like, be very kind of purposeful with your drafting if you're going to go with that late round QB strategy.
Leone, I want to get your take on what you define as elite quarterback, because I talked on Market Monday about quarterbacks who have a chance to finish in the top 5, top 3 among fantasy these days. You have to have that rushing component, right? And so the guys that I've been targeting that aren't necessarily considered maybe elite, but I think at least have a chance would be Anthony Richardson. His ADP is 57. Kyler Murray, his ADP is 82. And Jaden Daniels, his ADP is 103. Obviously, Kyler and Jaden aren't being drafted as quarterbacks in the elite bucket of draft capital, but I at least think have a chance. Those 3 guys at least have a chance to finish in the top 3 among quarterbacks. So yeah, how are you defining elite quarterback?
Yeah, I looked at it as total capital investment, regardless of how you got there. So those teams could have been like a bucket 1 if you also took a second quarterback a little bit earlier. If you just took 2 quarterbacks on those teams and you waited to the double-digit rounds for your second quarterback, that's probably like a middle-of-the-pack investment, maybe a second bucket investment. And those teams, did pretty well come playoff time. But again, a lot of bias, and just you were noting like Lamar's week. Like a lot of those teams were Lamar last year, where he was kind of the guy that was falling of the elite quarterback. So there's different ways you can put it together. I do like this year. We're pretty high on Hurts. I've got a lot of Hurts in my portfolio. I've also got a lot of 3 quarterback builds in that mid tier where it's not necessarily waiting real late, but like sometimes Burrow really falls if you've got one of the Cincinnati receivers. If you get him more in the 90s or closer to pick 100, Caleb Williams, Purdy, Kirk Cousins, and Trevor Lawrence, who we really like, and those guys are going like the 130s to the 150s. I like taking 3 in that range right now as sort of like, those are the teams I like the best, where I get 3 double stacks of quarterbacks that I think all have upside, but they're, you're not investing quite in that elite range. But I'm pretty flexible at quarterback this year. I don't see like one thing that I'm forcing myself to do in each draft.
Yeah. Go ahead, Herzig.
One thing I've been tinkering with, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, Leone, on this, is when I go with an elite QB, my second QB, I usually wait pretty long after, so I'm not expending too much capital at the QB position. Does my stack partner matter less with my second one? Because let's say I grab Jalen Hurts, and later on I'm going to grab maybe a Derek Carr. The likelihood of Derek Carr, even a 1-week sample, of outperforming Jalen Hurts is small. So, like, does it matter for me if I grab the Jalen Hurts? Should I then be grabbing that, Juwan Johnson if he was healthy, or Rashid Shaheed? Or like, is that 3 QB, like that, those stacks matter more because you're not taking the elite, and any of those could really be more like, have a decent likelihood of being your top performing QB for that week.
Yeah, I do think the stacks matter a little bit more when the quarterbacks are all like even, and then you're just playing the game of like, probability. Like one of these quarterbacks is probably gonna have a pretty good week, and he's gonna carry his pass catchers with him when you do it. I'm still like trying to stack Carr on the situation you mentioned, just because if in the rare chance he outscores Hurts, he is probably carrying a pass catcher with him. So you want to use that, and it's probably a bit more unique. But I do think, to your point, it's probably more important when you're spread out how the capital is allocated to the position.
Yeah. I really like what Leone said about if you miss out on elite quarterback, going for 3 in that kind of mid-range there gives you a huge ceiling. And I'd really try to include Jaden Daniels in there just in case he does hit in the really big way like we think he might be capable of. All right, let's go to wide receiver. Leone, what did the data show in terms of capital spend at wide receiver?
So this is the one where like year over year, we kind of see that if you aren't investing a lot of capital in the wide receiver position, you're just falling behind in terms of your odds of advancing out of the regular season and your odds of making it to the finals. This year, we saw that like the bucket 1 wide receivers out of the 5 buckets, that top bucket, 28% of the finalists were comprised of that top bucket. Break even would be 20%. Bucket 2 was 24%. Bucket 3, 20%. Bucket 4, 16%. Bucket 5, 12%. It's actually like super symmetrical. It's like 4 percentage point drop for each of them. So I do think it's important that you don't get caught too far behind at wide receiver. We can't draft like we did 3 or so years ago, where we could just draft 10 wide receivers and they were so undervalued late that we could cobble together scores. There's a little bit of that, but you can't do it to the extent that you used to be able to do it. It was interesting that once you made the finals, how much wide receiver capital you had didn't matter a ton. But obviously it mattered a ton getting there. For me personally, this year, my top strategy is like, I want probably 4 wide receivers by round 7. I like taking 3 in the first 5 rounds or so, but I'm willing to detour a little bit more than some other teams. So I'm like making sure that I'm solid at the top end, a wide receiver, but then I'm trying to kind of beat the really, really wide receiver heavy teams at the other positions and kind of, I guess, middle it a little bit.
Yeah. Uh, when I get behind a wide receiver, I never like the teams the way they come out. And it's especially true on DraftKings, but even on Underdog, I don't like the way the teams come out when I get behind at wide receiver. It's just tough now because everyone, most people are employing this strategy. So yeah, Herzig, any thoughts on wide receiver capital?
Yeah, I think some people are trying to be like, oh, I want to zig while everyone else is zagging. Everyone else is drafting wide receivers so early, so I want to focus elsewhere. And if you do that by kind of just ignoring the wide receiver position early on, you just can't make up for the quality with quantity at that position. And you're just kind of, it's going to be behind the 8 ball. Where I think there is an opportunity to zig while others are zagging is maybe you go wide receiver with your first 3 picks. And then you don't spend a wide receiver for a while after. It allows you to get those kind of 3 elite guys. You can then mix in maybe an elite QB, elite tight end, some running backs that you like that, hey, the running backs that we used to think were elite are now falling into those 4th, 5th, 6th round. So you can really build some strong teams like that and then come back later on with stacked partners for those later kind of wide receiver picks. But like there are ways to kind of take advantage of the new meta, but just ignoring wide receiver and saying, I'm going to stack up all the positions, I don't recommend that.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Leone? Considering we can just move right to running back here. What do you think about that, considering we now have guys going like Derrick Henry, I see going round 4. Pacheco's 47 overall. Josh Jacobs, who we like, 48. He's going 48 and a half is his ADP on half PPR Underdog. James Cook, 57. Rashad White, 60 ADP. Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker. I mean, you would not think of these guys as normal going in 5th, 6th round. And so what Herzig is saying is that you still get a good pocket in the draft for running back, even if you start with 3 wide receivers. What do you think about teams like that? And what do you think about running back capital as a whole?
Yeah, I love teams like that. One of my sprint teams in Underdog, I took a 4th round Derrick Henry and a 6th round Josh Jacobs. I'm fine at wide receiver. I have 4 wide receivers in my first 5 picks, and I've still got what in the past would be considered like a hyper fragile build with those types of running backs, where you might only be drafting 4 or 5 because you invested so much early, except now you're not investing as much early. So I can still take 5 running backs. I don't have to stop at 4. Also, those teams that, if you do give yourself a chance to bank like the best running backs, once you make the playoffs, these teams are a bit supercharged because the running backs that project the best are like more likely to perform the best on a single week relative to the wide receiver position. We saw that in last year's simulated finals. The teams that simulated the best, they were teams that only had 4 running backs, but they banked it. Like they had CMC and 3 other guys, or they had Jahmyr Gibbs and Breece Hall paired together, but then they were still good at wide receiver and waited to fill out, their 3rd, 4th, 5th running back spots later. So there's a lot of ways you can build that way. And to Herzig's point too, you do give yourself that flexibility where if you get sniped on stacks, with the quarterbacks that are paired with your earlier wide receivers, now you've still got room to roster wide receivers at the back end of the draft and figure out some backdoor stacks. Like we like Deshaun Watson, you compare him with, Judy and Elijah Moore. You mentioned the Corley stuff with Aaron Rodgers. There's things you can do Drake May with the rookie receivers that if you draft 6 or 7 wide receivers in the first 10 rounds, you really should be stopping at 6 to 7. You've invested so much, you reach a diminishing point of returns. You don't have that flexibility to figure out your stacks at the very end of the draft, or else you're over investing in the wide receiver position.
Tight end, I see. We got into a bit of a debate. People thought on our last strategy show that we did not talk about elite tight end, and that was just our fault, to be honest. My fault specifically. We should talk about the elite tight end debate here, Leone. I think of it in terms of small versus large. In other words, like the success I've had in best ball has been with dusty tight end rooms. I mean, absolute stone cold dust. However, the finals I've been in have been like 6-person finals, 12-person finals, and I got away with, I think it was 10 Isaiah Likely points and then maybe like 11 Isaiah Likely points last year at tight end. To win a 500-person tournament or a 1,000-person tournament, you're going to need something closer to the nuts, and 10 Isaiah Likely points is probably not going to be enough because one of these tight ends is going to smash. And so that's just one thing I wanted to be clear about on how I think about elite tight end. Leone, of course, is looking at the BBM data, which is a large field tournament. Leone, what do you want to tell the people about tight end?
Yeah, how Herzig said at quarterback, we had 2 years of completely different data. Same thing at tight ends. 2 years ago, Travis Kelce smashes. No surprise, the data tells you elite tight end's great. Last year, Kelce doesn't smash. Andrews misses time. And we have two of the biggest breakout late round tight ends we've ever had in Trey McBride and Sam Laporta. And, go figure, 3 tight end teams that didn't invest in an early tight end smashed. So I think you can almost throw the data out completely. It's so indicative of like these specific individual performances. This season, we've got more options for an early tight end than we've had, with Dalton Kincaid, Laporta, McBride joining the mix, and Andrews, Kelce hanging on and sticking in there. And then you've still got like Kittle and Pitts, these efficiency guys at the back end of that group. So more than we've had before. We have less kind of exciting tight ends at the back end of the draft. So I do like to try to get an elite tight end, but I don't feel like it's an absolute must. I think your point about that large field tournament, if one of these guys has a huge spike week, it's going to be tough to chase them cobbling together 3 late tight ends. But I just did a podcast with Eric Beinfor talking about like taking DFS concepts to best ball. And, I'm thinking through, we have a lot of weeks in DFS. Granted, it's not the full slate of games. We've missed 2 or 3 on Sunday, but we have a lot of weeks where it's like the tight end just doesn't matter. So if you just spend as little as possible, that you were in good shape. And that can happen in a best ball mania finals too, where none of the tight ends have that great of a week 17 and you're in a pretty good shape because you just invested in other positions early. So I'm lean more elite tight end than not, but I don't think you're dead if you miss out on those guys.
Yeah. My only thing about that DFS comp is, isn't it different because you can get Evan Ingram here in like round 7 or whatever. You can get George Kittle in round 6. Whereas in DFS, if you play those guys, there's so much opportunity cost. You're not going to, you spend a bunch of salary on those guys. You're not going to have that great of a team around it. You know what I mean?
It's different, but part of the reason it works in DFS is still that like a lot of weeks we have weeks where tight ends don't score more than like 15, 16 points, like even on DraftKings full PPR scoring, in which case then you're just talking about a Noah Fant touchdown and you're right there. And it's still an advantage to have more outs than in terms of other skill players that you drafted early when everyone has these tight ends that aren't going to matter as much. So that's definitely a good point by you, but I think it translates to some extent. I do also think like as like Brock Bowers' ADP has fallen, there's some fun teams where like we really like Dallas Goedert and Jalen Hurts. Like you compare, I have some Bowers Goedert teams, which is like a fun pairing to me. You get one guy that's a little bit safer, one guy with like that rookie type of upside that hopefully you can chase.
Herzig, any thoughts here on tight end?
Yeah, like in the past, I'm usually a late tight end guy. Like if we look back, and it's not just like 2021, 3 of the top 6 tight ends, they were late round picks. Dalton Schultz, Dawson Knox, Rob Gronkowski. Next year, 2 of the top 6 were late round picks again. Taysom Hill, Evan Ingram. And yeah, last year you have Laporta finishing number 1 overall, McBride with his strong finish. But I think what's most important is we need to look at the meta for this year. We need to look at who is available this year. And when I look at the late round tight ends, none of them give me that level of I can see where the upside is coming from. Last year, we had the young guys. We had Ferguson. We had Laporta as the rookie. We had McBride in the sophomore year. Like, you could see those paths. I'm willing to listen, but, like, look at those late rounds. Tell me who's going to, like, Noah Fant, he's the darling right now. At best case, he's like the 4th pass-catching option on a run-first team. Juwan Johnson, we just lost. Chig, yes, you have Brian Callahan coming in. Yes, they're going to be a little more pass heavy, But again, he's still probably like the fourth best pass option, and you've got two running backs that are catching passes. Like, I just don't see the path this year. And when you have the value at the tight end position falling into the 6th, 7th round where you can get the Ingram, the Kittle, or the Andrews in the 5th, like that's where I find myself most often drafting one of those top 7. Or if I miss out on the top 7, as Leone said, trying to get 2 in that 8 to 11 range.
Yeah. And one last thing I'd say about some of these elite tight ends, they fit really well in stacks. Like you can get Kelsey Mahomes easily. You can get McBride, Kyler easily. You can get Andrews, Lamar. I've struggled a bit to get Allen Kincaid because Kincaid is very popular, but you can get that Pitts and Cousin you can certainly get, and Purdy, Kittle you can get, and Ingram, Lawrence you can certainly get also. So yeah, I mean you can get all those, which I think makes elite tight end a little bit more appealing this year. All right, we're going to try to implement all of this strategy talk into an actual draft. I'm registering now for a 30 seconds per pick fast draft, and it will start shortly here as action is just completely out of control on Underdog. Constant drafts going off. We do have the 5th pick here, and I will say that when this team wins $1.5 million, since it is on my account, I will be collecting all of the 1.5 myself.
No. I'll make sure to Venmo you my $8.33.
I talked to my legal team, and that is not binding. Okay, we are here with the 5th overall pick. I did just upload our latest rankings here, so you can sort by our ranks. You can also sort by ADP, of course, and then we have the draft board here as things go. I think in the first couple of rounds, we're not thinking too much about the strategy stuff that we just talked about. We have, obviously, in the first 2 rounds, we are going to be going mostly just off of our rankings. I think there's some thought out there, Herzig, that like no one wants to take a stand on round 1 or round 2 guys, right? Like the stands to take are a little bit later. If you start going outside of ADP too much in rounds 1 and round 2, you can end up really lopsiding your exposures. And maybe that's okay if you feel really good. Like if you think AJ Brown is going to smash every other wide receiver this year and you want to take him ahead of Puka, ahead of Justin Jefferson, it's risky, but you can do it. Herzig, how do you think about round 1 here?
Yeah, I mean, I think for today, we should probably take Juwan Johnson first overall since we're not getting any equity in this. But otherwise, so we are on the clock there. I'd probably just go straight down the line, which is probably Justin Jefferson with the ADP. For me, I think if you're willing to take a stand on like Justin Jefferson versus Amon-Ra, which is going against the ADP, you need to be extremely confident. But the truth is, if you look at projections, it is extremely close. If you want to compare it to like DFS, it's probably like a 0.1 difference. Where I'm more willing to take stands is if structurally you want to avoid the running backs or you want to go more on the running backs. That's where I think it makes more sense, because now you're not trying to say that you're smarter than at that 0.1, like a tiny little difference at the same position. But if you think you can build a better hero RB team, if you like the zero RB better, that's where I'm more fine with people saying like, hey, I'm going to take a stand on ownership wise that way.
The one guy, I'm probably going to be boring and mostly follow ADP the first round. If I was to mess around, I might mess around with some like heavy Bijan builds, just think like huge ceiling, and then go to wide receiver, for the next 5 rounds or whatever. And then we still kind of get that build that Herzig talked about where we're okay at wide receiver up the top. We still have the flexibility late. But we've also given ourselves outs to like be better at the other positions early.
Yeah. And I absolutely love the Bijan hero RB teams, but I'm not taking him over Justin Jefferson or Amon-Ra personally.
The other factor too is like Jefferson and Amon-Ra are really good stack out guys where their quarterbacks don't go too early, especially Jefferson. Like we have a pretty high leverage stance on JJ McCarthy. You're probably only drafting him if you have Jefferson or Addison or something. So you might not get him as much as, our raw ranks would indicate, but that's also another reason to play Jefferson is to be able to get some exposure to a quarterback we really like late.
Yeah, for sure. And they did announce that Sam Darnold will come in to camp as the starter. Would not shock me if Sam Darnold starts in week 1, 2, 3, 4. That doesn't really affect my opinion on JJ McCarthy. I talked about that on Market Monday a couple weeks ago. All right, relatively standard first couple rounds here so far outside of Jahmyr Gibbs going 8 overall, which was a little bit of a surprise. I would personally not take Jahmyr Gibbs over Breece Hall or AJ Brown or Puka Nacua.
Yeah, you can see You can see
Go
with
ahead.
the Jahmyr Gibbs pick, they also went with the Brandon Ayuk. This person is trying to go for that week 17 unique stack, which, hey, I mean, I get the value of it. For me personally, I'm more willing to wait until come August when we know that is a unique stack. And
Yeah.
because you're really giving up some ADP right now, who knows? Maybe Ayuk actually falls for some reason, maybe, and he becomes a third rounder. And now people are still getting Gibson, Ayuk, but with another better player in between.
Yeah. I want to circle back on that point for a second here. We are on the clock. Our top ranked player is Mike Evans by ADP. It is the running backs JT and Saquon. What do you guys like here in our
I
round
don't
2
really
pick?
like these running backs, so I'm probably going receiver, but I'm pretty open as to which receiver.
I
Yeah.
probably would. Yeah, I'm fine with any of the wide receivers.
Uh,
Evans or Waddle probably the best, but either's fine.
I like Evans. The concern with Evans that they're losing Dave Canales and the pass game is going to fall off a cliff. I think though when you have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, I don't think it's going to completely fall off a cliff. And you see these huge spike week games out of Mike Evans, which I think makes a difference there for me. Waddle would be a fine consideration, especially with the contingent value. Talked about that on last week's Market Monday. Go ahead, Leone.
We got to get you queuing up some players. So, you're making me nervous waiting to click the actual draft button.
Okay. We started wide receiver. We do have JT here.
Well,
We're going to be picking at 29 overall.
One thing to consider at this point is we've set ourselves up for one of two. Either we grab an elite QB and then we go with a late second of either Baker or JJ, or this could be a 3 QB team where it's Baker, JJ, and another mid-late guy as well. We have flexibility, but at this point of the draft, that's what I'm really starting to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And based on what we just talked about, and considering we did not get Devonta or AJ Brown and the Bills stuff, if you don't get Kincaid, I don't love as much. So my lean would be to think more about 3 quarterback teams here. Saquon goes, as does Jonathan Taylor. Oh, on the Gibbs Ayuk start. So for those guys who don't understand what's going on here, this is a bit out of whack from ADP. The reason that G-Lab did that is because these two teams play in week 17. That's it.
Give me HN.
I'd take HN here. I'm taking HN here.
Right. So based on our rankings, Hurts is best, but his ADP is 14 difference. So yeah, HN, we don't have a running back yet. And I think that's a very strong pick in Mr. HN. Man, HN and Mike Evans together, you can have some massive weeks. Massive weeks.
Herzig probably knows our three week 17 teams so far.
Yes. Of course. You got Carolina, you got Cleveland, and
you're cheating. You're cheating. I can tell. Those eyes are cheating.
No, I'm trying to see who our third player was. Where is
we got? I know we got Packers, Carolina, and
I forgot Justin Jefferson. Yeah.
What's the Miami one?
Miami is Cleveland. Remember?
Cleveland.
Tua, cold weather, blah blah blah.
And that's another. If we do the 3 quarterback build, we know we've got the Watson stuff, and we're another quarterback we're ahead of ADP on. If you can make the stack partners work.
Yeah. I mean, Amari Cooper is going to be coming into range. 44 is a little early. 53 could make sense. And if you wanted to kind of like, hey, it fits with our build. Also, you grab the Watson, Baker, JJ. Not a bad little combo of 3 players. QBs.
All right. We have started Justin Jefferson, Mike Evans, Devon Achane with our first 3 picks for anyone listening here at home. After we took Devon Achane, the wide receiver range just continues. Tank Dell, DK Metcalf, Zay Flowers, George Pickens all go off the board. We have seen no tight ends and no quarterbacks off the board yet. We are up to pick 34 here already. And this is like, you're just not going to see this in home leagues. Home leagues are going to look way, way, way different. We'll be talking way more about that starting up in July and August. There goes Derrick Henry at 34 overall.
That Pickens pick doesn't make sense.
Pickens is the one I'm struggling to wrap my head around the most.
Well, Leone, let me ask you what you think about this from a structural perspective. The guy who took Breece Hall first went Breece Hall at 10 overall, Marvin Harrison at 15 overall. What do you think about coming back with Derrick Henry there with the 34th overall pick? Because wide receiver starts to thin out. I don't blame him. I think Derrick Henry is a better pick than most of the wide receivers there, but now he has 2 running backs in his first 3 picks.
Yeah, he's really just got to be disciplined and go pass catcher. He really could have gone elite tight end too. I probably gone elite tight end instead of Henry, I think, there with the receivers being pushed up, but we'll see. He still grabs elite. He's really got to go receiver ×3 the next 3 rounds, I think.
All right.
We'll see if he does it.
I think I might have gone Kyron because you're getting probably a pretty unique combo of Brees and Kyron at this point. And I think that's actually pretty good value on Kyron as well. But at that point, I'm now saying like I'm drafting a bunch of wide receivers in my next kind of 3-4 picks.
All right. We are up here in 2 picks. We are at 44 overall. Our top ranked player left is T. Higgins with an ADP of 41, then Josh Jacobs, Isaiah Pacheco. Lamar Jackson did go. So all the quarterbacks, the true elite quarterbacks, I think have gone. Mahomes, Richardson, Stroud are the next quarterbacks here. What do you guys think here as we get to pick 44?
Sir, can you unstar all those running backs?
I would take Jacobs in round 5 with the Jefferson stuff. But I think I'd go Higgins or Kirk here.
I agree with
unless you really wanted, Lamar went. So I think I'd go Higgins or Kirk here. That also keeps us, if one of the tight ends fall into 5, we can either go running back or tight end. But yeah, if you go to wide receiver, I think there's a little bit of a drop off.
And there goes T. Higgins, 1 pick before us. The only other thing that I would think about is Trey McBride setting up the Kyler stack, just because I like Kyler's ADP here, and I do like McBride. But yeah, Herzig, we have 18 seconds. Any thoughts on this pick?
I would go Kirk, but I'm okay with McBride as well. Both those set up nice stack partners that we're looking for as well. I just don't think we can take a running back here.
Yeah, all right. Sounds like both you guys prefer Kirk.
Yeah, a lean, not like you have to take Kirk here, but I always feel a little bit better. Just, we've got the 3 through 4, and I think we might have some options coming back in 5 where we might deviate from receiver.
Yep.
And the thing we didn't hit on explicitly in the wide receiver discussion, but the scarcity is like a big part of it. Like people look at the half PPR scoring and say like, oh, running backs, we're shorting them relative to the wide receivers, but you got to start 3 wide receivers each week. And like, that's really a huge facet of it. You'll notice our super flex rankings are quite different, where that flex spot or the 3rd wide receiver spot gets replaced by a super flex spot.
All right.
Yeah, in the super flex, I love drafting 0 wide receiver builds because there's just such strong value and you only need to start 2 each week. It's just a completely different game.
All right. We are coming back here at 53 overall. Our top ranked player remaining is James Cook. We do already have Devon Achane at the running back position, then Keenan Allen, Joe Mixon, Mark Andrews, I think is a consideration as well, even though we did not get Lamar, and Anthony Richardson, elite QB. Leone, what do you think about this one?
I'm still probably waiting at running back here, just knowing that we have one locked in. I'm probably taking Keenan or Andrews. I'm probably taking Andrews here. Just, it's past ADP, elite tight end. I'm probably taking Andrews here.
Yeah,
I'm Andrews as well.
Yeah, Andrews, we have ranked 52nd, whereas pick 53. ADP is 49.9 here. And even though we didn't get Lamar, Andrews can still separate so hard.
Yeah, we're also comparing his ADP to the ADP of the other guys we're considering, which is like, not just to the pick we're at, and the other guys we like, it's more like a full half round.
Sure. And we weren't going to pick again until pick 68. And so to the point about elite tight end, maybe we could have gotten Kittle, but it would have either been like a reach on Evan Ingram or pray that Kittle gets to us. Otherwise, you get into that range of tight end like we talked about, where maybe it's a Goddard Bowers build, but if it gets beyond that, it starts to get real ugly. And again, this is Best Ball Mania with the huge final. So I do like getting elite tight end there. I think Andrews was the no-brainer. If you want to make a case for like Kincaid straight up over Andrews, I would have been okay with that, but I like them both this year a lot.
Agreed.
All right. So there was a big quarterback run there between picks 41 and 52. Lamar, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Anthony Richardson all went. And that's kind of when you're picking at the ends there, it can be hard to handle the quarterback position. I've seen people do weird things like reach really high for Zay Flowers, like at the end, Lamar and Zay, or reach really hard for Andrews and go Lamar and Andrews, or Josh Allen Kincaid and really reach on Kincaid. It seems like a force, but yeah, Herzig, any thoughts on those people at the ends doing the elite quarterback stuff with a reaching at a pass catcher?
This.
Yeah, I mean that Glad pick right there, the one who went with the Detroit, San Francisco, then reaching the Zay Flowers to get the Lamar afterwards, and I'm sure he was hoping that Mark Andrews would fall him the 3 spots there. That's someone
But he
who is
does take
probably
another opponent, week 17 opponent in Mixon. I think he.
Yep.
Do you think he's overdoing it?
I was going to say I think he's a sharp drafter that is that is giving up ADP, hoping for that week 17 and the stacks. Yeah.
All right. After we took Andrews, it went Hollywood Brown, Kincaid, Joe Mixon, Ridley, Keenan Allen, James Cook, Chris Godwin, Kyle Pitts. We are up in about 5 picks here. We currently have no quarterback, Devon Achane at running back, J. Jeff, Mike Evans, Christian Kirk at wide receiver, Mark Andrews at tight end. Herzig, what do you think about this next pick here?
Yeah, DeAndre Hopkins gives us the correlation with the Jacksonville we wanted, but if we can get one of these running backs to fall to us, I think this is a good time to take our first running back in either Rashad or Kenneth Walker.
Second.
We have Achane, yep.
Okay, our second running back. Yeah, sorry. And I'm happy with either Rashad White, Kenneth Walker. I think there's a bit of a teardrop after Kenneth Walker on the running back position. And then we've got a lot of wide receivers that we also like. Brian Thomas would make sense for the second Jacksonville, and then we really lean into the Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, Addison and Dunze where they just went, but those also would have given us like potential double stack setups. They're gone now, but they would have been in consideration. I think White's definitely the pick. We've got Mike Evans, already. We can kind of set that up.
Yep. And George Kittle goes. So if we had not taken Mark Andrews there, we would have been mostly shut out unless we reach on Evan Ingram here at the tight end position. But yeah, I think given that we have Mike Evans, Rashad White is our top ranked player. Seems like a no-brainer.
I think so. He's also like top by ADP or pretty close to the top. So he kind of just checks, he checks all the boxes. I know some people are worried he's very dead zoney in terms of like not being an efficient running back. I definitely think whenever you're a not explosive running back, which Rashad White is, there's some risk with a rookie like Bucky Irving, but I also don't want to like be overly paranoid about a 4th round rookie coming in when Rashad White was a goal line back, showed that he could really perform very well in the receiving game, from an efficiency as well as volume perspective. So, he's the type of back I'm okay taking in these middle rounds, even though there is risk, with him. There's risk with Walker as well,
Yeah, 2 running backs in our first 6 rounds, Leone, based on the data. How are you feeling about that?
So I like, this is kind of like the type of teams I like to build, in this current environment, which is we're not getting shut out of wide receiver early, but we're making some detours. You will probably want to go receiver here, get our 4 by round 7. Brian Thomas, who we have starred, would be, I think, the ideal run out.
He just went.
I think Carolina is a stack partner, though. Deontay Johnson would be great as well. Christian Watson is also correlated. Keon Coleman gets us some rookie exposure after ADP. I'm probably just going receiver here unless like these top 3 guys all go, which they won't. We're guaranteed. I think Deontay's my favorite. That's Tampa Bay, Carolina, right? Herzig, is that?
Yep, that's a nice bring back there. Otherwise, I probably would have gone with the Keon Coleman for the ADP aspect and the rookie, but I think Deontay makes sense as a bring back as we're probably going to grab Baker.
Man, Evan Ingram would have gotten to us. Not that I just think I might have, if I knew Evan Ingram was going to get back to us for sure, I might have taken someone else other than Mark Andrews there. But yeah, Deontay Johnson here, who I don't actually love this year, but certainly makes sense as part of this team here. We now have 4 wide receivers. Herzig, what do you think? Go ahead, Leone. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I agree with Herzig that like if it wasn't for stack setup, I would have gone Coleman over Deontay. If you don't take Coleman there, you're usually just not going to get him at all. And I don't think he's a profile I want to be like completely out on. We just think the ADP is a little aggressive right now.
Yeah, I mean, I knew we get Ingram and we already have Christian Kirk here, when we are on the clock in round 5, I probably would have taken Hollywood Brown or someone else, Keenan Allen, someone else over Mark Andrews. And then that 2v2 would have given us Evan Ingram here at 77, but there was no way to know for sure Evan Ingram was going to be there. Herzig, what do you think about that run out there? How Evan Ingram ended up lasting?
Yeah, process-wise, I'm still happy with the Mark Andrews, but I agree with you. If we knew that Evan Ingram was going to make it, that makes sense. We also could have gone with Chris Godwin, which would have been a slight reach, but it gives us also that double stack with the Tampa side of things. But then we wanted to grab Rashad White because that's not now probably investing too much in that offense. A lot of woulda couldas, but like I still think Mark Andrews is the right pick there, and I'm still happy with what we're building out.
All right. So we just added Rashad White and Deontay Johnson as we move into round 8 here.
This could be like a Lawrence Baker, JJ type of team. We're definitely headed for the 3 quarterbacks at this point.
Yeah, but I do have those 3 quarterbacks start. I mean, like, I like Joe Burrow. I like Dak. Just those guys naked just does not make much sense to me at all. I do include, when I get into these spots where I don't have any quarterbacks yet, I always put Jaden Daniels in my queue, just because like upside and backdoor stacks, etc.
And Jaden with 2 other stacked quarterbacks is like a pretty good build, even if you don't, if it doesn't quite work out.
Yeah. No one picks Jahan Dotson. You can usually get Jahan Dotson or McCaffrey or something like that.
Yeah, I do think that even though the wide receivers aren't that attractive here, and this is a part of the draft where I'm often drafting running backs, I think we still need to kind of grab some of these wide receivers and continue to build. We have 4 through 7 rounds right now, which isn't a horrible spot to be. I mean, it's actually a pretty good spot, but we also kind of drafted those a little later than I usually like to because we took the 3rd and the 5th round on running back, tight end.
Yeah. Based on our rankings, wide receiver is not the pick here, but on ADP, we can get there. Leone, what do you think about this pick as it comes back to us at 92 overall?
Yeah, I think I'm with Herzig. You never know exactly how the draft's going to fall. We're getting some running back fallers now, but I think we're going wide receiver, just build wise. It makes the most sense for us. And this is 2 where we might double tap receiver. I'm more likely to lean into ADP and just try and get 2 in a row that are the best.
Yeah. So our choices here, our top ranked guy is Lockett, then Palmer, then Curtis Samuel. I would probably go Lockett here, but what do you guys think?
I'd go Samuel or Lockett. Either is fine by me.
Yep, I'm good with Lockett. I'm gonna probably either, but I think I like Lockett.
Okay. So we currently have 0 quarterbacks. We have 2 running backs, 5 wide receivers, and 1 tight end. It's going to get back to us here at pick 101. That is in the Jaden Daniels range. What do you guys think about him here? Would you rather go wide receiver? I mean, it's tough because this is my thing on quarterback. Like, everybody.
I don't think I don't know. I might maybe see if Jaden wrapped around, but it kind of depends what's there.
I think running back could be in play too if we just don't like any of the wide receivers, because this is an area of the draft where like I do like a lot of these running backs. We have 5 wide receivers at this point. I think Jaden does.
Justin, I know you're in on the two running backs from same team at times. What about with Mostert, Achane?
It's a little too much draft capital. When you're drafting Achane at that spot, like we're really hoping for him to kind of have that huge season. Like we liked Achane and Mostert last year because we were getting them in like the 12th and the 14th or whatever.
All right, we are 2 picks away here. Rashid Shaheed went. Curtis Samuel went. Jalen Warren and Najee Harris both went. 2 guys I like for sure. I kind of like Jaden Daniels here for upside at quarterback, but I could be talked into running back also. The only thing is I kind of like the running backs like in the next tier, like the Spears, Chase Brown, Blake Corum. I'm just not sure they get back to us.
Yeah, I'm pretty open to like anything at this point.
I think it's Daniels or Javonte, Singletary, Benson type. Herzig, what do you think?
I like Jaden. Let's put him to the top of the queue while we talk through. And now we're not like, we don't have to reach on these other QBs now. Because if we didn't take Jaden here and we're really like, okay, we need Lawrence, we need Baker, we need McCarthy, we're probably going to be reaching on each of them and we're giving up value on that. This allows us to now, okay, next pick, ADP Trevor Lawrence is 120. Our next pick is going to be just about that before it, but we don't have to reach. We can take that chance that maybe he falls back to us because worst case scenario, we at least still have that nice kind of number 1 QB in Jaden.
Yeah.
And I'd also be starring, just we don't forget about like Marshawn Lloyd and like Dobbs on the bring back side of Minnesota. knowing McCarthy's a quarterback we can get later, and like Herzig said, we can really kind of wait on Lawrence, Mayfield, and try and get a good value on those guys, knowing we've got one locked in. I think we've got pretty flexible.
For everybody watching on YouTube, and hopefully you guys who are listening to this on audio will go check out the YouTube. It'll obviously be a much better experience for you. But I've started a ton of running backs that I like, and that's why I'm okay passing on running back there. I'm not sure about the draft capital buckets on running back, but this year, I mean, man, these guys go so late. Charbonnet and Marshawn Lloyd and Kendra Miller, they are one injury away from absolutely smashing. Blake Corum, Tajay Spears, I mean, standalone value, Chase Brown, standalone value, and one injury away from absolutely smashing. So I'm totally fine with where we're at running back here. We only have Achane and Rashad White through 9 rounds, but I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Robinson feels like a great target if he falls to us. It'd be a little ADP value, and he's one of those guys where I think both Jaden Daniels and Brian Robinson can have a huge year if they play up in pace. I think that's one that I'd probably target if he falls to us.
Then I like Javonte. Obviously we're not getting correlation stuff with Javonte, but I do think he might slip the next week or so with a lot of this McMillan steam, and we kind of talked about that and figured we were already baking that in quite a bit, and the McMillan stuff. Javonte goes, so he's not going to fall to us, but I still think the McMillan's path to like a real meaningful role is somewhat difficult. I like him at the end of drafts. I like him better on DraftKings where it's full PPR. I think Javonte still got the best shot.
We will grab.
I've got McMillan on the brain.
We got the Tampa stack going. Little nuggets on the Broncos here real quick. From last year, they targeted their running backs more than any other team at 33% of targets to running backs. And then, so not only did they hit a bunch, they did it very effectively from a yards per route run. Those 3 running backs in there were all top 12 out of all running backs. Samaje Perine was number 1, Jaleel McLaughlin was number 6, and Javonte was number 12. And then they go and draft Bo Nix, who's like the king of screens, who's the king of dump offs. So we know that this team is going to pass a ton of running backs. Whoever that ends up being is going to be very valuable, especially with PPR, but it still has value in a half PPR.
All right.
It's a tricky spot. We could go like Lawrence Gabe. We can take Palmer at receiver, but we know we want to take like probably at least, a couple receiver spots late with the Washington guys and with McMillan, who I like quite a bit.
I feel pretty strongly about a running back here. I think this is your last chance to grab one of the running backs that kind of has the pole position and still has upside. There are a decent amount of running backs after this that kind of can work their way or find their way into it. But I'd probably go Gus as 1, Eckler as 2nd because of the correlation. Yeah, I like Gus Edwards here.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, so Leone, what do you think about the correlation here? Jaden is not necessarily a guy that we expect to target running backs a ton, but that is Eckler's calling card here versus Gus Edwards.
Yeah, I think I take lean Gus here. There's a chance we could even get Eckler coming back and push quarterback, some more, and we can do like late round stack partners and like be close to done at running back.
Yeah, Chase Brown went 1 pick before us. I do like Chase Brown.
Would you double tap RB here, guys, if Eckler came back?
I would go Trevor Lawrence if he falls to us as the first one. Honestly, that gives us the opportunity to have just a 2 QB build if we want as well.
That's true.
With the Jaden and Trevor Lawrence, and then you can see what it looks like later on for someone like JJ. We don't need to do Baker considering we have a running back and a wide receiver. So it's not like we double stacked with the pass catchers, even though Rashad White is a pass catcher.
Yeah.
We also
there's some irony too, and you can build out. I'm not capturing this in the data I'm doing because I'm linking everything to the quarterback. But as Herzig pointed out, these other game stack correlations without the quarterback matter. Especially you're talking like a later round pure pocket passer. It's generally not that Baker is going to be the difference maker in week 17. It's just that if he has a really good score, maybe not difference maker, but a really good score, you can use that score and you get the guys carried along with him. So we could still have him, go off by Baker standards in week 17 and be good. I think Eckler went, so I'm definitely on Lawrence getting the stack after ADP. Small chance that we get Gabe Davis coming back for the double next round as well.
Yeah, and we do have Trevor Lawrence ranked ahead of Josh Palmer here.
Yeah, I'd say decent chance Gabe Davis falls to us. Yes, like it'd be a ADP value, but I'm seeing that a player like him, people just for whatever reason aren't too bullish on. We already have the Trevor Lawrence as well. And it's not like people are building too much for the bring back of Jacksonville because they play Tennessee. No one has Will Levis yet. The only Titans that have been drafted so far, well, I guess you have the running backs and you have the DeAndre and Calvin Ridley, but no one's like, hey, I'm really planning on this stack, so I'm looking for bring backs often at that point.
I wanted to highlight, and we did take Trevor Lawrence there, setting up the Lawrence Christian Kirk stack. Maybe we can get Gabe Davis to fall, as the guys mentioned there. I did want to highlight this Fins Fan 29 because one of the things we talked about during the strategy part was if you start with 5 straight wide receivers, which I'm not sure what you think about that, Leone, from a data perspective. He started 5 straight wide receivers: Amon-Ra, Debo, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, Hollywood Brown. Since then, he has taken 0 wide receivers. He went Kittle, Montgomery, Burrow, Connor, Chase Brown, Jared Goff. This to me is the way to set up it up right. What do you think about what Fins Fan 29 did?
Yeah, I like that. He's probably going to end up with 7 wide receivers total. He took 5 out of the gate, then he detours. I think that's fine. I've done, like, if the values fall, I've done wide receiver times 6 out of the gate. It's just like I'm literally stopping there and maybe adding 1 very, very late if I'm doing it.
And to me, the problem with that is what we talked about. Like, there's backdoor stacks I want to do that I really like. If you did that last year, it boxed you out from getting Puka Nacua, which I know is like cherry picking and everything, but it's true. I mean, you box yourself out of late round wide receivers that have a chance. But yeah, it's just a different strategy.
And the late round wide receivers at the juncture we're drafting now in June, I'd rather take a chance in a lot of instances versus the running backs where we don't know the depth chart, because the depth chart's so important for the running back. Whereas the receiver, if you just bank a guy who's good and there's some uncertainty, like he's probably going to work his way up there at some point.
Yeah. All right. Gabe Davis does unfortunately go. We will be on the clock 7 picks at pick 140. We have a chance at something like Kendra Miller or Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd, one of my favorites there. Kendra Miller, I like. Also, any other thoughts here, Herzig, as we come around at 140?
Yeah, Jahan Dotson's probably the top target right now because it guarantees us a pass catcher for our Jaden Daniels, and I just don't love Benson that much. So, like, this is kind of one of your last chances unless you want to grab McCaffrey at the end. And when we look at the running backs on the comeback, like Marshawn Lloyd, Kendra Miller, as well as Rico Daddle, like there's a lot of guys in that area that I like that also a lot of those have correlation. So I'd rather say, hey, give us the Jahan if we can get him, and then dealer's choice, whatever kind of falls to us on the 13th round with those running backs.
And Adam, if you sort by ADP on wide receiver specifically, this is too where, like, you're not just comparing ADP to the spot you're drafting at and to all other players, but like positionally by ADP, it's a full round. Dotson's ahead. I still think he's probably not going to last to us, but if he did, I think it's the clear top pick.
Yeah, for sure. I do like these Justin Herbert backdoors. There's like people are just completely writing off the Chargers. Like there's no chance they're going to score any points passing, which I think that's the likeliest outcome, but not the only one. And man, it's so cheap. 12.4, 136 overall for Justin Herbert. I think that's interesting backdoors that we haven't really talked about. We are 2 picks away, hoping Jahan Dotson does fall to us.
I might go Lloyd over Polk if we didn't get Dotson, just to lock in the correlation, but it's tough because, as Herzig said, there's still a couple other running backs there.
Yeah. Okay, so Rico Dowdle goes to Fins Fan. So like Fins Fan couldn't capitalize on Jahan Dotson ADP value because he spent so much. Not that he necessarily wanted to, but clear to me that we need to take Jahan Dotson here. I actually like Jahan Dotson. Shout out Penn State. And if Jaden Daniels hits in the kind of like Lamar-esque way, he's going to bring at least one guy with him. And I like not betting that much capital on Terry McLaurin, instead saving it for this 133 overall. We're actually at 140 overall here for Jahan Dotson. So yeah, great run out there for Jahan Dotson to fall to us, I think.
And one note on a guy like Jahan Dotson, I'll throw Josh Downs in there as well, those are guys that I am rarely ever getting unless they're stacked. Because in my mind, when those guys have a huge game, their QB, because their QB we already know is doing so much on the ground, is also probably having a really big game. So let's say it's week 17 and Jahan Dotson has a great breakout game, 100 plus yards, 1 touchdown, 2 touchdowns. it's most likely that Jaden Daniels is finishing QB1 as well. And so it's harder for me to draft someone like Dotson or Downs without that QB, knowing I'm kind of behind the eight ball if they have a huge game. But when I do have that other QB, the Russian QB, that's when I want to even go more out of my way to increase my exposure to those players and do it in the right structure, which is like this.
For those of you who don't have your flashcards in front of you, we have a commander stack going and they play the Falcons in week 17. I did add Tyler Algier to the list there. That counts for game stack, Leone, even though Algier is not part of the pass game, correct?
Yes, that would count. On the opponent side, at least in the data, how I chopped it up was any skill player. For the team as your quarterback for a team stack, I required it to be a wide receiver or tight end.
All right.
It's arguably even better because now you're not concerned about your other side being the stack you wanted.
Right. Yeah. Marshawn Lloyd went one pick before us here. We can take Algier if we want. We can take reach on Baker, which I don't love. Any thoughts here?
I don't think we should reach on the quarterback. We got 2 outs for a third quarterback.
Yeah.
Herzig, who do you like skill player wise?
Yeah, I think probably Algier. And it sounds like Bijan's really going to have a different level of role this year. But you know what? If they're going to become a workhorse running back team, that just increased the contingency value for Algier.
Yeah, Herzig saying there, basically, if Bijan goes down, Algier's upside might be even more than it was last year because the role could be expansive as opposed to he was probably splitting no matter what happened to Bijan last year.
Yeah. And more likely to get hurt.
We could have considered Luke Musgrave there, but we did spend a ton on Mark Andrews, and we certainly need more running back.
But we've got Auden too. If we get the Baker double, like Auden and Sinnott are both. We've got a few correlated options. We've also got Chigakonkwo coming back on the Trevor Lawrence stuff. So we've got a lot of options correlated at tight end. I was really bummed about the Tucker Kraft injury. He was like one of my favorite late round tight ends. I don't think he's completely off the board as like an 18th rounder, but it's you're fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, him and Juwan, two of the kind of late tight end darlings, both suffered injuries.
Yeah, two of our faves.
All right, Deshaun Watson, pretty good pick here at 152 overall. Now, yeah, I was just checking for correlate for stacks there.
He's got Njoku.
He has Njoku, yep.
I don't know if he has any Jets, but yeah.
Yeah.
Jets Dolphins, that's last year.
All right, so our current build is 2 quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels and Trevor Lawrence, 4 running backs, Achane, Rashad White, Gus Edwards, Tyler Algier, 6 wide receivers, Jay Jeff, Mike Evans, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, Tyler Lockett, Jahan Dotson, 1 tight end in Mark Andrews. Herzig, how do you think about rest of draft here?
Right now, I'd be looking to see the picks in between us and the turn. What does their QB situation look like? And do we think they might be candidates to draft Baker? Because ideally, I'd like to not take Baker at this 164.
No, for this guy.
Yeah, this guy has Mike Evans with that's our team.
Us.
But this guy has A-Rich and Kyler. I think that's just enough by itself.
Yeah, A-Rich and Kyler, Dak and Tua.
That's probably enough on itself.
Yeah.
And then let's check with the two. There's only a
Jordan
one.
Love,
this guy could.
But no Bucks.
No stack partners, but he could do it.
And the last one, Fold My Socks, has Mahomes.
And no Tampa.
No Tampa. All right, so it's
and no tight end.
Risk it.
Yeah, someone could go Baker Auden, but I think we're not dead here if this team doesn't get Baker. Like we've got McCarthy late. We've got, as Herzig said, it's possible we only go 2 quarterbacks. I prefer a third stack guy, but we've just got some outs.
We just talked about the strategy. We have to take a third stack guy, Leone.
Yeah. I'd prefer to do it. This is where I get greedy and like, I'd rather, I'd push it if we can. What are we looking at? Yeah, I think that's probably the pick. Like on ADP value, positional need, correlation, it kind of checks all 3 boxes. We're talking about Luke Musgrave for service to audio listeners.
Servicing that we are talking about Luke Musgrave here. And obviously we'll get a boost if this Tucker Kraft injury lingers. Herzig, what do you think about this spot here? Baker or Musgrave seem like the best picks to me.
Yeah, and like people are gonna be like, wait, why aren't you taking Ben Sinnott? Because you have the stack partner, and isn't he like right at ADP? Yeah, but you're still giving up a round of ADP potential value with the Luke Musgrave. I also think Luke Musgrave's ADP is a bit of a value right now because the Tucker Craft injury news hasn't really been accounted for, or at least we haven't just seen like a major shift in. So I like getting Luke Musgrave. I think that's our only Packer for our Minnesota mini stack bring back. So I'm good with that.
Yeah, that was close. Was probably close between Sinnott and Musgrave. It was probably close, but I
Leone,
like the Musgrave pick.
any data on tight end? If you take Andrews, should this always be 2 tight end teams with Andrews?
I generally play it that way. Sometimes if I get a correlated piece who we like in a vacuum, I'll do the third. Like it can fill the flex, certainly. Um, but I generally try to go 2 tight ends. I think part of the power of taking an elite tight end is just being able to devote that capital to other positions.
Agreed.
So
One other Sinnott issue is Sinnott had the same bye week as Mark Andrews, so that would have put us in a bit of a meh situation.
Yeah.
Are you guys
That's
ever eating a 0 at tight end?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I don't like to,
I will.
but I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
You
I
projected.
had a
I was gonna say your projected points for a late tight end is something like 5 to 6 underdog points. So because when you're normally considering like, oh, should I draft that third one or should I draft a different one later on? And then you consider, okay, but in those their bye weeks, you're also getting, you don't have either of them playing by themselves for 2 weeks with the bye week. So overall, I think you're actually giving up like 3 to 4 points. Like it's really not much. QB,
right.
I don't like doing it at all.
Fold My Socks had no tight ends. Panic picked Juwan Johnson, who's hurt, and then took Cade Otton. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to be in trouble here at tight end is Fold My Socks. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, where it's tough. I think what Herzig has mentioned, too, it's tough to cobble together 3 very late tight ends this year. I would personally, if I was him, try to get Noah Fant in there for some upside and maybe Sinnott as well. But anyways, back to us. We're going to have Baker.
I'd
here.
probably pass on Sinnott here, but I do see some validity with, we're a little weaker at receiver. He could contribute to flex, and we get the stack partner and kind of like an upside rookie. But it would take from a wide receiver pick, I think.
I would much
think just
rather
go
go
Baker?
3 QB, especially when you're considering the stacks, than 3 tight end. We invested
Sure.
more draft capital
Yeah.
at the tight end position with the Mark Andrews. Baker gives us the additional stack, and we only have Jaden and Lawrence. So I think Baker's the good choice here.
Yeah. The only thing I
let's
would
go Baker. I like McMillan if you want to start
Yeah.
him a ton as a late round pick right now. I think he's a guy we could get a lot of closing line value on.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is that passing on Baker is that we probably can get JJ McCarthy. Nobody wants to take JJ McCarthy, so we probably could have still gotten him. But I do like the way this is setting up with a big Tampa stack here.
Yeah, we were going to end up with a pretty big. If we do get McMillan, we'll have Baker with a running back, 2 wide receivers, and we have the Deontay bring back there. Structurally, we've got 3 picks remaining. We definitely want one more running back, one more receiver, and then it's kind of, do we want 8 receivers or 6 running backs is going to be, I think, the question mark for us. I might lean stack partners and go receivers and just kind of, again, we're just really hoping Achane has, is a top 5 running back all season.
Yeah, I think 3-5-8-2 makes a lot of sense here, but I agree with you. Go 3-5-7-2 and then make a decision with that last pick between running back and wide receiver. Obviously, the dream scenario would be we get Luke McCaffrey falling to us, we get Jalen McMillan. But we also know that running back really does drop off. And so it may make sense, like if we don't get our perfect stack partner, to lock in a running back before the 18th round, because I do notice at this point in drafts in June, when we have less clarity in the depth charts, I feel a lot better about 16th round running backs than 18th.
Yeah, I think Herbert, by our ranks, is definitely the top target. After him, we really like Elijah Mitchell as someone like we're pretty confident that's the RB2 there. Whereas a lot of these other guys, we don't know if they're RB2. The Irvin one's interesting where, Rashad White's fallen late enough that I do think you could do 2 RBs with a Tampa Bay kind of onslaught there.
Bucky would probably be my pick over Khalil. But how would you evaluate those two where we are right now?
I think I'm playing this a little bit more like, we're only taking 5, so it's a pseudo hyper fragile build, and like that slightly leans me towards Herbert and just kind of hoping that Rashad White is steady all season long, doesn't get hurt. But I think it's pretty close. Bucky gives you a pretty good ADP value at this point. It's almost 2 full rounds. So I think those are the top 2 guys, certainly. Adam, who do you prefer there?
Yeah, I kind of like the handcuffing a little bit between Bucky and Rashad White. At least I think we would know they would have a really good option every week. But more importantly, if one gets hurt, I mean, you need weird things to happen. Oh, Bucky went to Finn's fan. Right
Bucky goes. You guys had talked me into Bucky, but he goes. So I do think it's Herbert here, and then we just hopefully get lucky and go stack partner to close out.
Yeah.
If
The
McCaffrey
thing about
if McCaffrey would have fallen to us, I probably would have pushed on the McCaffrey first. But I like
he's talking about Luke McCaffrey. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing on Herbert is like, DeAndre Swift could faceplant or become a committee back. B, Herbert could end up on another team like Dallas per se and really have a good chance. So yeah. And like you see Braylon Allen hype is getting very, very hot. Talked about that on Market Monday as well. Yeah.
Also,
wow.
if DeAndre Swift, I mean, hasn't been the healthiest running back. If he gets hurt, like they have all the confidence in the world in Khalil Herbert. No, he's not just going to magically start catching passes, but on a strong Chicago team that we expect to kind of be improving and peaking near playoffs. If Khalil Herbert's the starting running back there for whatever reason, like that's a really strong value.
And I think our stance right now in the ranks, we're basically saying is Roshan Johnson's overvalued by the market right now. And that's something, we'll continue to evaluate, but we're a little bit ahead of ADP on Herbert, ahead of ADP on Swift, and behind on Johnson. So it's kind of like we like Chicago more, but I like McMillan a lot. He's probably the guy I would take here.
Agreed.
Yeah. We have Baker. McMillan is a rookie who I think they're going to try to play outside. And I know people, but I think he can actually play everywhere. So I agree with Leone. There'll probably be some buzz. If he ices Trey Palmer completely in camp, Jalen McMillan's ADP will rise. We just took him at 197 overall, Jalen McMillan. And we now have McMillan, Mike Evans, Rashad White, and Baker Mayfield.
They also brought in Sterling Shepard.
Yeah,
I'm not concerned about that. If you see positive reports there, I know obviously Baker knows him from the college days. But I think Jalen McMillan is going to win the starting outside spot, and that allows Chris Godwin to go into the slot, which we like a lot.
McMillan's also I feel like Crane, where Crane can tell these really good stories about how things work. Pat Crane from Legendary Upside, but if McMillan's good, this offense should really roll. We've got Baker with Evans, and I don't think it would be taking from Evans. I just think it would be the offense. If they get a breakout rookie wide receiver, it's going to be hard for this offense to be bad. Obviously, we have the Canales risk, but we've made our bet on Tampa Bay at this point.
Yeah, Leone, what do you think from a quarterback perspective? What Fantasy I did here, or Fantasy E? Herbert at 136, Levis at 184, Bryce Young at 201. Can a team like that compete with such little draft capital at quarterback?
I don't love it, but can it? Yeah. I mean, we saw CJ Stroud went where Will Levis went last year.
Yeah.
I highly doubt Will Levis can do what CJ Stroud did. CJ Stroud was at one point favored to go number 1 overall, went number 2. Levis, we had the big fall on. But if I'm drafting very greedily, I don't mind that as I don't want to do this with every team, but I got kind of screwed and I made it work with these quarterbacks. I think you can take some chances, understanding that as your worst case scenario, I guess.
Yeah.
Assuming I would definitely want it stacked though. I'm not sure what his correlations are. I would.
Yeah, not great.
He's got the Carolina. He's got Thielen at least with the stack. I don't know if he's got anything with Tennessee. That's a little bit tougher because
he has a Pollard. Oh, and Hopkins. Yeah, he has Hopkins.
Okay, that's because if a late round quarterback really breaks out, the teammates are probably very undervalued.
Yep. I like the Elijah Moore pick here. Rondale Moore goes. I do take Rondale Moore as part of Kirk Cousins stuff. For me, what do you guys think here? For our last 18th and final pick of this $1.5 million team.
Yeah, I wanted either Tyler Boyd or Rondale Moore because both those are
Same.
bringbacks to our stacks. With both of those gone, let's at least take a quick look at the running backs as well,
Is
just in
CH
case
still
there's
there, or
something.
did he go?
I think CH is gone because Fant is still there at tight end.
Yeah, don't like
Probably
any of these
taking a
running backs.
Yeah, I'm probably taking receiver here. This is where, these Giants receivers we have are undervalued. Generally, I don't draft them just because I'm working on stack partners, but I kind of like the Hyatt. He's second round or second year receiver. He's a big play guy. That's probably my preference. What about
Yeah.
you, Herzig?
Trey Palmer is a stack candidate, but again, our bet is already on McMillan icing him, so I think we should go someone else.
Yeah, I'm good with Jalen Hyatt. Greg Dortch isn't a bad one either. I like Jalen Hyatt though.
Yeah. I mean, there's some chance that Daniel Jones gets it together. It's just there's also some chance that like Neighbors isn't a complete superstar and they need help from someone else. I do think Neighbors is going to be awesome, but I don't know. I didn't love our last round. I didn't love our
Yeah, our
last
bet
round
on
pick.
Hyatt, I think, is that like Neighbors is good, and we get some spike weeks on deep balls to Hyatt,
Yeah.
and he's
Yeah.
not a target hog, but he's like an efficiency breakout type.
And
Yeah.
what about that backups narrative where Drew Lock is thrown to Jalen Hyatt all throughout the season and for practice, and then Drew Lock comes in and there's Jalen Hyatt. They got the timing down pat.
Yeah, that's one we're going to try to test. Dylan Lobb goes a very buzzy guy. If I'm going to take a shot on Lobb, it's usually very, very late on DraftKings, not FanDuel for the full PPR. I can't believe Noah Fant's going to go undrafted in this. Are you guys sick? These guys are sick.
I'm not sick. I think he's a very good like late round value, but like Justin kind of was saying when we were talking through the tight end stuff, he's probably not going to be like the guy you need this year. Like I think he can serve an important part and he's a solid value, but I'm kind of fine with what we did.
Oh yeah, I'm fine with what we did. I just can't believe he went undrafted in this whole.
I was surprised.
Yeah,
especially we had that dude who was like in serious tight end trouble and panicked.
Yeah.
And he went Greg Dulcich at the very last pick, which I think
that's
is
weird.
Unstacked.
All right. So we ended up with 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. It is a bet on Devon Achane here, which, we talked about that on one of the shows. I forget, but this was way past ADP on a team where I think it made a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I actually kind of like this team. We ended up with a bunch of Bucks stuff. Yeah. Herzig, any final thoughts on this team?
I mean, I'm in Tampa. That's my area. So if this wins $1.5 million, I'm at least getting some form of equity in ETR or something payoff.
Yeah. Good luck collecting on when this team wins 1.5 million. All right. We talked a lot of strategy. We did a draft. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. This was fun. Be sure you check out the YouTube. I know this would be most of the shows actually are much better on YouTube than just listening with all the graphics and everything that producer Ryan is working on, but especially this one. Check out the YouTube while you're there. Hit subscribe. It is indeed free on the YouTube machine. For Herzig, for Leone, for producer Ryan, for producer Luke, I am indeed Adam. Good luck, everybody.